Hey everyone, it's Michele Lim again, and welcome to the Mastering Stand-Up Comedy Review or Synopsis. So this week I'm going to be talking about three of the different forms of comedy which makes up part two of this book, and they are observational stand-up, anecdotal stand-up, and act out. And I was really interested to read these three chapters because I find that I do all of these three things, and I think that, as I've said before, you don't have to stick to one type of comedy. The beauty of comedy is that you can do like a lot of different types. And I think it's going to be really interesting for us to hear about the different types of comedy that are available to us to use so that we can try to incorporate more of these different styles into our act. But for me, I guess growing up with Seinfeld and loving Seinfeld, observational comedy is probably where I started to make my jokes. Well, I guess it would be more like anecdotal and observational, but that has just always been like the kind of my natural style, and the style that I feel most comfortable doing. So with observational comedy, um, Stephen says the structure can house any type of content that you can think of: the news, politics, pop culture, your life, and so on. It's a structure of stand-up writing that you can employ to create jokes about anything that crosses your mind. Unlike funny stories, which have a beginning, middle, and an end, an observational joke can just be one sentence. For example, this Jay Leno joke: "If God wanted us to vote, He would have given us candidates." So, but you don't have to like spend a lot of time writing observational jokes. It could be just one line. But he does note that observational comedy is conversational, right? So it's meant to be spoken. You're supposed to sound like you're having a conversation. And the best observational jokes sound like you've just kind of like thought of this idea off the cuff. Um, when in reality it's been like carefully crafted and like it's really been analyzed and the wording has been chosen very deliberately. But the biggest laughs come when the audience think that you're making the joke up on the spot, right? So he talks about that, and then we go into anecdotal stand-up, which is more about like storytelling things that could be true or could not be true, but it's like based on a true story. And a lot of the things that I talk about in my comedy are anecdotes, which sometimes are not always true, but it's like based on truth. So something might have happened, and then I would think, oh, it would be funny if this thing happened, and then I make a story about it. Or I might say a line and then be like, oh, that's funny. I'm going to recreate that line in a story later and then tell it on stage. So, so he says that there are three key elements to anecdotal stand-up, right? So the first one is you have to build frequent laugh lines into the story by organizing the story not chronologically but by subject, um, and then you need to make sure that that story seems genuine coming from your persona. So basically, when you tell a story and you do anecdotal stand up, you don't have to do it in chronological order if it's not going to be funny like that. You should really order it in terms of like what the subject is, and then have all the laugh joke, all the laugh lines that relate to that first subject, and then you move on to the second subject, and so on. And he does a good example. It's pretty long, so I won't do the whole thing, but he talks about this stand-up piece by Hannibal Buress, and he talks about jaywalking in Montreal. So maybe you can like go look that up and then see how he breaks that down in terms of the different subjects and then the laugh lines that are associated with that. Um, okay, so so his last point on anecdotal stand-up is in good anecdotal stand-up, the characters in the story are recognizable and the behavior is believable, even if the premise of the story is fanciful. And I think that is very important. Um, so when you come on stage, you need to establish what your persona is, and then when you're telling your anecdotal story, the audience will find it funny because they'll be like, "Oh yeah, that's Michelle's personality. Like she would get into a situation like that, even if the story isn't believable." You want the audience to be thinking, "Well, if it could happen to anyone, it would definitely happen to her or him or whoever you are." So so he has this example about one of his students called Dino. And he says, Dino's personality is clear. He's mind-bogglingly clueless. So he tells this story, um, but before he tells his joke, he opens with more jokes that vividly establish his persona. For example, I tried to divorce my wife last year, but she told me we got divorced 15 years ago. And I said, when were you going to tell me? And she said, I did 15 years ago when we got divorced. And then she went on and on and on about, I don't know, something about me not listening to her. So he establishes that persona that he's really clueless. And then he goes on to tell his second joke, which is talking about how he lives. He lives by JFK Airport, but he can't. You can't fly to LaGuardia Airport from JFK, and he says it's a shame because I live near JFK and I just got a job at LaGuardia, and I discovered you can only fly if you change planes, and then he does this whole bit about he has to fly from JFK to Denver, Colorado, and then he has a layover, and then he goes back to LaGuardia. And he took the red eye because he wanted to be at work nice and early. So he has this bit. So obviously he's not going to be doing this flight. Like this flight did not happen, but based on his personality and him being really clueless, the audience thinks it's really funny because it suits his personality. Okay, and then the last. I've got two more bonus rounds. So I've got two more things. So the third style is the stand-up sketch, and that's basically where you're just recreating like a scene on the stage, and you're creating like this different scenario. Um, so for the stand-up sketch, he says, um, as a delivery system for laugh lines, the stand-up sketch can't be beat. Once the initial setup is in place, the rest of the piece can be virtually all punchlines and non-stop laughs. So basically saying that it's easy to do this sketch thing because it's so easy to like create the sketch and you don't have to worry about, you know, the dialogue and trying to really get the jokes through the dialogue, because what you're doing is you're establishing like this fantasy scene where there's like crazy like things gonna happen. Like imagine if Darth Vader was on the I've never seen Star Wars, so excuse me for this, but basically he talks about this sketch which is like where Okay, he talks about Eddie Izzard, and he says that he has this joke called the Star Wars Cantina, and he says he sets it up by simply positing that the Death Star must have someplace to eat, a cafeteria. And in the performance, he creates two characters. The first is Darth Vader, and the second is a cafeteria worker who refuses to serve Vader unless he takes a tray. So he goes about that and he sets up the scene. So that scene is already ridiculous, and that allows you to really milk out those laugh lines because the scene is already so ridiculous, but the customers or the audience is already like on for the ride with you. Um, so you can like make it as like far fetched as you want, right? Okay, so then the last form that he talks about is act outs, and act outs are kind of different to sketch comedy because in act outs you're still acting out different characters, but you break character and you talk to the audience for a little bit. Whereas in sketch comedy, you just do the whole sketch from start to finish. You don't engage with the audience. Like you don't break that fourth wall. You're just doing an entire sketch, and after you do the sketch, then you talk to the audience. Whereas in act outs, you might be like, you're acting out different parts of the character, but then you put in your own voice, if that makes sense. So here he goes into the scene that Louis C.K. does about Monopoly, and he talks about how he likes playing Monopoly with his daughters, but his youngest daughter is not emotionally developed enough to handle how badly she's going to lose in every game of Monopoly, right? And so he goes through the piece and he says it's hard to imagine this piece having nearly the same comic impact if Louis chose to merely describe the scene with his daughter rather than acting it out. So instead of Louis C.K. being like, oh, I played Monopoly with a daughter, and then she said this, and then I said this, and then she said this, he's acting it out. So he's like, Daddy, like, you're going to take all my money? And then he's like, well, daughter, like, da-da-da. And he's like acting out those two bits, but he's also interrupting those scenes with his own interjections and like commentary on this. And that's why it's called the act out and not the sketch comedy. So the author goes on to say the change in tone from his voice From the loving dad playing Candyland to the cold-blooded capitalist playing Monopoly creates a lot of the comedy, and this would be lost in a description. Which brings me to a good general guideline about writing comedy. It is always better to show the audience something rather than tell it. So if you can show it or recreate the scene, then you should definitely do that. Let them see it. It's almost always funnier. A great rewriting technique for a joke that is almost there but needs punching up is to retell it through act out. So instead of trying to write an observational comedy about how you went to the supermarket, do an act out and actually act out you being in the supermarket and interacting with whoever's in the supermarket that you wanted to be in that scene. So I hope that helps you. It was a little long. I have a lot of the book to get through. I'm really excited about getting through the rest of this book with you, and I'm also excited to share my stand up that I did on the weekend. So I did some new stand up on the weekend. I tried a lot of new jokes. So I'm happy, and I'm like very interested to hear your feedback about what you think went well, or maybe like suggestions you have on what I could change or how I could tweak it and improve it a little bit. Also, shout out to my new subscriber, Tiger. I'm sorry I didn't shout out to you in the beginning of this video, but look out for my my stand-up set. It's the stand-up set. It's going to be coming out on Thursday this week. So thank you so much, and I will see you guys next week. Bye.